From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
Welcome back to From the Void. I'm your host, John Williamson, and we're back with part 2 of my conversation with author and researcher Tony Wright. So welcome to this week's mystery, the conclusion of the mystery of the Yuba County Five on From the Void.
Man, that is really interesting. I hadn't heard the piece about the man in the woods. It seems to be a little bit more in line with what they know at that point versus the instance where they're spotted wearing different clothing, and would explain. It seems to reason that had they had access to a payphone at some point, they probably would have made calls home, and it doesn't seem that there's any record of them making any calls to any of their family or friends at that point. So initially, when law enforcement arrives, they're following up on these leads. They see this abandoned car. They see footprints off into the snow, essentially. What happens at this point? Because it's quite a bit of time between when they locate the vehicle. And as you mentioned, this is a prized possession. Jack's prized possession, and I think I remember hearing that the window was rolled down as well.
Right.
And it seems like sort of careless in terms of the way he typically treated this car that was such a prized possession. So talk about what happens in between when the first initial member of the group of five is located and when they find the vehicle, because quite a bit of time passes.
Right. So the vehicle's found February 28th, and it's on this road in the middle of nowhere. And if you drive that way up into the Plumas, it's nowhere. But there's people that live up there, but it's the middle of nowhere. So when that car is found abandoned, the window's rolled down and it's unlocked, which is very unusual for Jack Madruga. He would lock his car, leave the windows up. He had basically a set of rules for his car. He didn't want people drinking beer in his car. He didn't want backseat drivers. He just wanted to get from point A to point B, no questions asked. So when that car is found abandoned, it is said in the Files of the Unexplained episode that there were 4 sets of tracks that went from the Montego into the Plumas National Forest. That has been said by Jackie Hewitt's father, who was Jack Hewitt Sr. Jackie Hewitt's dad claims that he saw 4 sets of footprints. The only thing that is kind of hurting that is the fact that when they did their investigation of that abandoned car, people were up there on the 26th, 27th, 25th, 26th, and possibly the 27th up in that area. So we don't know if it's the men or if it was other people up there, because Joseph Shones, who had his car abandoned up there and said he had a heart attack, had his wife and a couple family friends come get that car and move it. Then there were sightings of other people up in that area sort of doing whatever, skiing or doing whatever winter sports they were doing. So if there were footprints going from the Montego into the woods, it's hard to tell who made the footprints. And if there were 4, just because the weather had kind of changed a little bit from being snowy to rainy, so we don't know how much if the rain melted some of the footprints and could have made it look like there was 4 instead of 5. But anyway, when the investigation begins up in the Plumas starting February 28th, they don't get any kind of break until early June of that same year, when 3 guys are on a motorcycle adventure through the Plumas. And when they're out and about, they kind of underestimate the conditions of the roads because it had been a bad winter and a bad spring. So trees are down, there's debris in the road, and what they thought was going to be an easy Sunday drive is just turning into a headache. They know that there's a map somewhere, and it's at a location called the Daniels Inc. Campground. So the Daniels Inc. Campground's probably 12, 15 miles from where they abandoned the car towards the northeast. when they get there, they're hit with like this wall of just this foul smell. And they kind of know maybe what it could be, like maybe an animal died or something happened. And they begin to look around the area and they notice there's these trailers. And they're used by Forest Service employees and people who do like, if there's fires or any other kind of lumber work to be done up there, they will use those trailers. They notice one of the windows is broken out of the trailer and a guy just kind of peeks in, and there's beds and like tables and like a kitchen area set up in there. And they notice in one of the beds, there's a dead body. So the guy kind of pulls his head out and says, there's a dead body, and the other guys don't believe him. So as they're looking around the area, they begin to realize this guy's telling the truth. There's someone's dead in that trailer. So they have to go to like a payphone somewhere and call the sheriff's department and say, we just found a dead body up at the Daniels Inn campground. You need to come look at it. And at first the sheriff's department's like, no, I don't think you guys are telling the truth, or you're just pulling our leg. And finally, after some convincing, the sheriff's department goes up that way and they look at the guy in the trailer. And it's Ted Weir, who's one of the 5 missing men. When he goes missing, he's probably 200, 220 pounds. When they find him, he's probably lost 80 to 100 pounds based on their estimates. They also noticed that when he went missing, he was clean shaven. He had a full beard. So they begin to think, how long did he survive up here? His shoes were gone. His feet were, he didn't have socks on. He was badly frostbitten. And his cause of death was something called pulmonary edema, which is sort of a fluid buildup in the lungs. And they just can't believe what they found, that this guy is 12 miles northeast of the car that had gone missing. And the only way to get there is to follow these intricate sort of like mountain roads that lead up to that area. And so it puzzles them that this guy made it that far. And I think searchers, from the time when they find the car on the 28th, knowing it was abandoned on the 24th, knew those guys were going to get hit with like hypothermia, and they were going to be walking through snow, and this was not good for their survival. And when they find Ted Weir, they're thinking, how did he live for so long? And then they begin to notice that in the trailer, there's all these military C ration cans that have been opened. So they begin to think, okay, he's not here alone. And also when they find Ted, he's been sort of tucked into his bed a certain way, where he has these layers of blankets on him. And they said, Ted couldn't tuck himself like that. Nobody could tuck himself like that. They begin to figure out, okay, maybe 2 people have been in here, maybe 3. So they start to search the area. About 3 miles south of the trailer, they find the remains of Jack Madruga, the driver, and Bill Sterling, one of the 5. Jack has his keys on him to the car. Bill's remains have been scattered like Jack's, so there's really not much they can do with examining that scene. And then a day or 2 after that, the remains of Jackie Hewitt are found, and they're found about a mile south of the trailer. So now we have 4 of the 5. Gary Mathias is the last person. And when they begin to finish their search, it's probably June 10th, June 11th. And 8 days later, they call off the search and say, we're done. We can't find Gary Mathias. Maybe we'll find him another time. And that's where the story ends as far as the investigation, June 18th, June 19th, 1978. And these guys just, you're doing all this searching call today. So Gary's never been found since that time. So when they find Ted, Ted's the only person they find who's, I guess you would say, in a complete state. The others is just scattered bones and scattered remains, and they don't know how they all ended up there. But they do surmise that hypothermia and exposure played a key role in their deaths. And they just don't understand how Ted lived for as long as he did, because they believe he could have lived anywhere from like 4 to 8 weeks in that trailer by himself or with someone else, giving him food and possibly water.
Yeah, that's what's really one of the many puzzling pieces of this case. One of which is, I think one of the layers that I kind of inferenced earlier is the fact that I think it seems like a lot of the media and even law enforcement really leaned heavily into the fact that, several of these gentlemen had, mental disabilities. And, as we know, with any mental disability, it could be a wide range of mental disabilities, from very, very minor to a little more significant. And the family members have been pretty adamant about the fact that these guys were equipped enough to the point where, as you had said, they had made road trips many times before without incident, and so this should have been no big deal.
Right.
And there's some, as you said, suggested some evidence that they were able to find these rations that were left behind, at least one of the gentlemen anyway, and survive off of this food for a while.
Yep.
In fact, I think if I read correctly, two of them had military history, had been in the military as well. And so had some experience there as well. So it kind of leaves the question sort of open-ended in terms of, first of all, what led them out there into the middle of nowhere? And then how is it that some of them at least appeared to survive for an extended period of time? And where the hell is Gary? Gary has just never been found. And why did they just, suddenly call off the search after finding 4 of the 5 and not continue to find the fifth person?
So with the guys going from the car to the trailer, that really stunned law enforcement because they didn't think they could make that walk because it's 12 miles. There's snow, freezing temperatures. It was raining. It was sleeting. Hypothermia would have kicked in quickly for those guys because one person told the press the minute they got out of the car, their lives were measured in minutes and not hours or days. So that really blew their minds. But the family members said, look, when you talk to us about these guys, we said all 5 could walk long distances. And that's one thing that they said to members of law enforcement. Ted Weir could walk 5 to 7 miles. And he would take Jackie Hewitt with him, or Bill Sterling could do the same amount. Gary was a good athlete as well. Gary, when he was schizophrenic or diagnosed early with schizophrenia, he wasn't taking medication. He had an episode where he walked from Portland, Oregon, somewhere in the suburbs, to Sacramento, and that's 500 miles. He walked it. And he said he had survived stealing either milk off of people's porches when that was a thing. And he would find cat food or something to eat, dog food. And when his family saw him, they're like, where have you been? We haven't seen you in forever. And he said, I walked from Oregon. And so if these guys have the ability to do all this walking, they were able to get from the car to the trailer, which surprised the searchers because they thought the guys would go downhill. Because when you go into the Plumas, you're going up. And they thought the guys would walk down the road and they would try to look for a place. And there was a place called Mountain House, which was a local sort of hangout hotel, sort of mountain hangout place and bar. It could have been open. Someone could have been around. They could have used a phone there because that's where Joseph Shones walked to the next day. So that whole part of the investigation has puzzled people for a long time. If they walked across the terrain, it'd be 5 miles, but due to the ruggedness of the Plumas and the foothills of the Sierra Nevada, it's impossible to make that walk. I mean, you're not doing that easily at all. So to this day, it stumps people how many of them made it to the trailer. Some people think all 5 made it to the trailer. It's been theorized that Jack Madruga, the driver, and Bill Sterling fell behind early, and the plan was to go back and get them. So when they got to the trailer, it probably would have been Ted Weir, Jackie Hewitt, and Gary Mathias. And with Mathias having a military background, to open the C rations, you need something called, I think it's like a P36 or P38 can opener. And if you know how to use it, you can open them fairly easy. And some of the cans have been opened with that. Some of them have been opened with something called a church key, where if you're familiar with what you use to open certain bottles of beer, and it kind of has that pointed top, you kind of have to go through very painstakingly and open a can that way. So someone was opening the cans and eating the food. We don't know who did eat all the food. Due to Ted Weir's weight loss, excuse me, I think it's easy to assume he may not have eaten food. And his family thinks that he could have been under the impression that stealing, and he didn't want to be a person who was stealing from other people. But again, how would he have been able to live so long without food? Was he getting water? Also, the trailer where they found Ted had a propane hookup, and all you had to do was turn it on, and there's a way to heat up the trailer. But at the time, with the amount of snow and maybe their thinking capabilities being impacted by hypothermia, they may not have been acting rationally. And that plays into the whole theory as well. And now getting to Gary, they stop in June because they don't know where to find this guy. He's nowhere near where they think he is. And an idea of the Plumas, or giving you an idea of how big the Plumas is, it's 1.1 million acres. So I think some of these guys just thought he could be anywhere. And we don't have all day to search the Plumas National Forest. And in my opinion, I think they decided to call it a day. They thought, we'll find this guy eventually. Someone will find him, like hunters or people who are just going exploring in the wilderness. But he's never been found. So to this day, Gary Mathias is missing. But the belief of a lot of us, including myself, is that he died in the Plumas. No one knows where his remains are. And also over the years, there have been a series of forest fires in that area, like the Camp Fire, and there's been a few others. And that may have it may have his remains buried, or something may have happened where it's just never been uncovered. So to this day, Gary Mathias is viewed as missing, but the people that know Gary are well of the impression that he died at some point, and we think it was 1978, probably February, March. And so people have been trying to figure out where Gary went, because no one's been able to find his remains.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I would imagine at that point, law enforcement's looking at it from the perspective of, well, this investigation just changed from missing persons to searching for remains at this point.
Right.
So the sense of urgency probably wasn't there as it was in the early stages. Now there's some talk between the family and some other witnesses to suggest that law enforcement was told of the existence of these trailers, but again didn't think that there was any credence to the fact that they could have made it there, and so therefore maybe could have checked and didn't. Is there, in your research, is there any evidence to suggest that was the case, that maybe, they could have potentially at least saved a couple people had they checked a little early on?
See, that's a huge area of contention between law enforcement and the families, because the trailers were managed by the U.S. Forest Service. So when these guys go missing, due to where the men lived and where the car is located and some of the locations in the Plumas, it ends up being 4 sheriff's departments working together to do all the searching. So the different sheriff's departments decided, we'll handle certain aspects of the case and the search and rescue and this and that. So while they're looking for the men, someone says, or allegedly says, the U.S. Forest Service has these fire service trailers up near the Daniel Zane campground. Do you want those examined? And from the talk I've heard from people, it is rumored that they turned it down, saying no, they wouldn't make it that far. They couldn't do it. But when they're found there, one of the investigators says, how do they make it to this point? Because you just don't go from point A to point B. You got to really know what you're doing to follow these roads in the mountains to get to this point. It was also brought up that maybe a snowcat had plowed an area on the roads, which some people believe that they did, because with the snow being heavy that year and those trailers being relatively new, they wanted the snowcat to go to those trailers and get the snow off the top of the trailers to avoid any kind of like pressure on the roof for damage or water leaking in from when the snow begins to melt. They just wanted to avoid that. And what's interesting, they claim that the snowcat went up to those trailers on February 23rd, which is the day before they went missing. So if they disappear, could they have gone on the road and eventually have found it or discovered the road where they could have walked and it would have led them to the trailer? Could the snowcat have, if they followed the tracks or whatever, they would have felt like, oh, well, we're going to go somewhere. But if they get to the trailer, what is also discovered, nobody made any effort to do anything like burn something, because there were books in the trailer. There could have been a barrel they could have used. There were matches in the trailer. Could they have set something on fire to do a smoke signal or something like that to catch the attention of people? Because when they're doing all this searching in the Plumas, early March, they even call in a helicopter from the California Highway Patrol to search the area. And if their claims are right, the search area could have covered where they are and would have gone over that region. So there's all of these claims being made of, we didn't know where the trailer was. We did an extensive search. Nobody told us about the trailer. Nobody did this. And so there's a lot of finger pointing. And I think people are just trying to not be blamed for certain things that went down.
Sure. Yeah, I can absolutely see that. Kind of to go back to the sort of claims of discrimination too, because I do feel like a lot of the families were very clear in the fact that they felt like, hey, like even in the way it's reported in the newspapers, there's some terminology in regards to mental disabilities that we don't tend to use anymore and a little outmoded. That's printed in the newspapers, and sort of there's an emphasis placed on that part of the story, and seems to be used as sort of an excuse as to why perhaps certain things weren't done in the case. It goes back to, that would have played a role in why they could not have potentially made it this far, or it's five guys who aren't all together with it, who got lost. It seems like that was leaned into quite heavily. In your research, do you feel like that played a role in maybe perhaps things that may or may not have been done in regards to this case?
I think it played a role because even talking to the families, they believe that once it was reported that 4 had disabilities and 1 person had schizophrenia, that everyone just assumed it was their own fault, and they weren't smart enough to figure out how to drive and, be left unsupervised. Who does that? Who lets 5 guys drive from point A to point B? But if they've been doing this for years, have no, history of being lost, and everything's fine and the families trust them, then there's nothing to worry about. But once it starts getting reported and their disabilities become highlighted in a way with a certain word, sort of maybe at the time was probably used to bring sympathy to the story or urgency to the story, just gives people the impression, well, it's their own fault. Well, they got lost because they didn't know what they were doing. But if you look at the way that you would if you would drive the road from Chico back to Marysville, and you would go through Oroville to get to where they ended up, that's not a simple mistake of making a wrong turn. That's a continued drive through the Plumas. And Jack Madruga grew up in the area near Loma Rica. He was familiar with the area. Some of the other guys had been up to the Plumas before, so they would have known that's the wrong way and just turn around and go home. So our belief is that something, or when I say we, along with some of the families and researchers, when they went to Oroville, they probably exited the highway to use a restroom, or someone may have had to use a payphone, or something had to have been done there just to get off the highway. And the belief is when they got to Oroville, they either ran into someone they had previous issues with personally, or they ran into some drunk people who were just maybe seeing that these guys had disabilities and may want to start a fight, and things escalated in Oroville, which leads to either a chase or some sort of pursuit or some sort of threat where they head towards the Plumas thinking that they can, get out of the way and not be bothered by these guys, or person. So it's just so frustrating. And instead of sort of looking at the possible, foul play that goes into this, they're sort of more looking into their disabilities and mental illness instead of focusing on, what probably went wrong. It's a very frustrating case. And the more you look into it, you begin to see more theories and more ideas. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, even to this day, in the documentary, it seems like law enforcement's prevailing theory is still that, you've got these guys who aren't mentally equipped, who kind of wandered off and made a mistake and perished in the forest as a result of the weather and the the environment. And it still does not quite. It's not satisfying in the sense that it doesn't explain how they ended up there in the first place. And it, I think, diminishes the fact that these guys were quite capable. And as you said earlier, had made multiple road trips, in fact, to the same destination and returned without problems. And yet, for some strange reason, something went amiss on that particular evening that led them to where they met their demise. And so what are some of the prevailing theories that you feel like hold the most weight? I do recall one at the end of the documentary series mentioned by one of the family members that there was a known bully in the area that, perhaps was, as you said, chasing them or causing some issues that may have led to them ending up where they did.
So there is the bully theory, which is someone that had issues with one or all of the men. And that person is believed to have done something that night to either intercept the men or interact with the men. And with the interaction, everything got ugly. And it ended up with them in the Plumas National Forest. So it's very frustrating, but we have no proof to link that these guys had any kind of interaction with anyone. We just have theories. And I think the prevailing theories that people have are, if they got on the Oroville-Quincy Highway, they had to have been in Oroville, and something happened in Oroville. Did they see the bully in Oroville? Did they meet with some other people in Oroville? When they were traveling, was there some sort of person following them, sort of maybe being threatening in some kind of way, like road rage or something like that? Is that possible too? And maybe they exited the highway to get away from that person, thinking they could take another way home. But, it ended them with being in the Plumas. Because I just don't buy getting lost. As they say, getting hopped up on chocolate milk and candy, that's not going to lead you going the wrong direction. So the theories have been the bully possibly interacting with them, maybe at Bears Market in Chico, convincing them, like, we're going to take a drive, no questions asked, follow us to this spot. And that's where, maybe the guys got away from the guys that were tormenting them along with the bully and ran into the woods for help or to hide, maybe thinking that they could lay low for a while and not be hurt. And I think that's the same with the possibility with interacting with like drunk people or someone else in Oroville where things went bad. People have thought of other things, like maybe they saw a UFO and the UFO took them to the Plumas. There was a guy who said there was a rogue group of military ex-commandos who had helicopters that would terrorize people. I've heard theories from MK Ultra to anything that's sort of out there. But one I heard recently was, did anyone check the car to see if it had a potential, like, I guess you'd say like a carbon monoxide leak? Because if they were driving with the windows closed and there was probably a bad carbon monoxide leak, could that have impaired them in some way? And it caused some sort of confusion, having carbon monoxide poisoning, and they could have gone in the wrong direction. That's possible as well. I never saw anything in the report about the car being checked for that, because when they find the car, they're looking for fingerprints. And they find like Jack Madruga's fingerprints, and they find Gary Mathias's fingerprints, but the other guys didn't have anything on file for fingerprints, and they didn't have anything to work with. But the car didn't seem to be in a state of like there wasn't any blood, or there wasn't anything that looked like something bad had happened inside the car. They were inside the car, then they were gone. And that's even more frustrating, is how long were they in the car when they get on this road in the Plumas National Forest? Are they in there for 5 minutes? Are they in there for a few hours? And the guy who sees them has a reputation for not telling the truth and for lying and being a little bit shady himself. So how much of his story is true? But I think what people are starting to theorize is that they have to put together the problem. The problem is, how did it happen, and how did they go into the Plumas National Forest? And to this day, it's still a huge mystery. It's definitely not getting lost. It's definitely not a UFO or Bigfoot or anything like that. There was a fear of something or someone, and it just got them off the beaten path, and it led them to the Plumas. And I think that fear continued with them finding the trailer, and it's probably one of the reasons why they didn't signal for help. They thought that whatever was bothering them or whoever was threatening them would come after them or their families or something. There was some sort of fear. And with no real clues to use to our advantage in this research, we're kind of stuck throwing out theories. And one investigator said he had 1,000 theories back in the 70s. He felt like he could shoot holes through all of them once he started thinking about them, and it just drove him crazy. He said he couldn't figure out what happened. And with the book I've got, I think it's at this point the most in-depth research we've got in any information that people have, which I believe at this time there are people still alive who know what happened that night and are not speaking because of fear of like retaliation, or they don't want to be viewed as a tattletale or anything like that, or a narc or something. So hopefully we find out something and learn more about what happened that night.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the more frustrating thing about cases of this nature. It's almost been 50 years now, and the further the time goes on, the fewer witnesses we have potentially that could speak up and lend some information about what truly happened. And so you just hope that somebody, whether it's on their deathbed or prior, have the guts to speak up and say, yeah, I know what happened that night, so we can finally put this to bed. But I think that's the point that kept being driven home to me, is just there's really two questions that have never been satisfactorily answered. Number one, how did the car end up so far away from their destination? And number two, what caused them to exit the car, leave the vehicle behind, and flee into the forest? And until those two questions are answered, it feels like there's still a mystery out there. And the official answer does not seem to answer either one of those two questions.
Unfortunately, no. But hopefully, with this book, we can maybe get some help from some people who might know the area, who may remember some stories that they heard at one time, because that's something that I've noticed noticed during my research, that people know some things, what they've heard, whisperings and rumblings about things that went down that night. And if we can maybe put those together and start linking people, if possible, that would be huge. And it would make sense why everything went wrong that night. So anything can help. And this is the reason we need to get the story out there. And I'm so happy Files of the Unexplained was able to do this episode, because now more people know about the story and have the opportunity to learn about the case. So this is still frustrating, and there's still pieces to the puzzle that need to be found.
Yeah, absolutely. And my biggest takeaway, I think, from the documentary episode is just the fact that it still clearly weighs very heavily on the surviving family members. You can still, the pain there is still palpable, and the fact that they still feel like there's still questions out there that haven't been answered, and they're still waiting for, not that there's ever closure in those situations, but some semblance of resolution to it. So I hope you're right. I hope the book and the film help drive this case forward. Before I let you go, is there any other things that you discovered or unearthed while doing research that maybe weren't presented that are kind of interesting to note, or do you feel like we've kind of covered it for the most part?
I think if you have a chance to, learn more about the case, you'll find out more about Joseph Shones, the guy that saw what happened that night, and you'll get to see more of his stories and learn more about what he told investigators. I think that right there is a person you really want to look at and start to question, what could he have known something? Did he see something? How reliable is he? That's definitely a path for Yuba County Five researchers to go down. Also, you get to learn more if you read my book, and there's another book by Drew Beeson called Out of Bounds, What Happened to Yuba County Five. You get to know more about the five individually as people, and what their families were like, and how they were personally, what kind of athletes they were, what things they enjoyed to do. And you also get a little bit of I learned more about the community up there and some of the things that were going on. The Gateway projects where they went was, there was arson there at one time, and one of their directors was murdered. And so it was, there's so many of these avenues you can go down, and these, theories you can develop on the case. Once you're in the Yuba County Five research. You find out so much, but the more we can get out to the public and have people learning about the case and the five and what went down, anything can help. And, people have their theories, and, they have different things that they try to bring up, like, hey, did this happen? Did that happen? And so, like I say, feel free to check out podcasts on the topic, like from Mopac Audio. They did an 8-part series on the case, and they interviewed a bunch of people, including myself and some of the family members that you saw on Files of the Unexplained, and some of the law enforcement guys from the time too, who weren't on the episode. So there's so much to research on this case. It's a fun rabbit hole to go down, but it can also be very frustrating and heartbreaking once you really dig deep and just find out what, these guys went through and what the families have gone through for over 45 years. It's overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on, spending some of your time with me. Before I let you go, where can people go to get a copy of the book? And again, the book is called Things Aren't All Right, The Disappearance of the Yuba County Five. Where can they go to get a copy of that book, and where can they go to stay up on top of what you're up to?
So as far as the book, you can go to Amazon to get a copy of the book, or you can go through Genius Book Publishing to get the book directly from the publisher. Also, the book's available at Barnes & Noble if you want to order through them. Also, if you want to follow me, I'm on Instagram, Tony Wright Author, on Twitter, Tony Doug Wright, or you can just look for Tony Wright on Facebook, and you can see what I'm up to and what I'm not up to. So, yeah, absolutely come and find me on social media and talk about the case, and love connecting with people who are interested in the Yuba County Five. It's just been something that's really caught the attention of many people, and the more eyes we have on the case and the more people interested, that's key for the families to getting some kind of something in the way of closure. So it's been a lot of positive feedback from people, and we're meeting people from around the world that are touched by the case. So that's really nice.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, go check it out, folks. Check out the episode on Netflix. Just came out, I think, last week. I jumped on it very quickly, and all the episodes are fascinating, but this one in particular really caught me. And go check out the book, and I'll have all the links in the show notes so you can find Tony's book. And thanks again for coming on. That really.
Oh, thank you, John. Yeah, great show. So thank you very much. And I'm still listening to all your podcasts, so I'm getting through them.